I am Halli Casser-Jayne, and welcome to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, a podcast akin to the great salons of times past. Pour yourself a martini, grab a spot on your favorite sofa, and listen to the great artists, writers, politicians, and celebrities of our day discuss and debate the current political and economic scene, art and music, film, literature, or maybe talk about the newest trends in fashion, design, and haute cuisine. Whether it's the current political cocktail or the latest must-read, award-winning book, we tackle all topics and like to stir and sometimes shake things up. On this episode of the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, we begin with Podcast America, our weekly politics segment, in which veteran White House correspondent Matthew Cooper and I slice and dice the current political landscape as we near November 6th and the midterm election. And joining me in the second half hour, a very interesting man with an extremely interesting book, The DISRUPTORS, 50 People Who Changed the World. Stay tuned and enjoy the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. Let's get to it. Journalist and veteran White House correspondent Matthew Cooper is known for his in-depth reporting and analysis from Washington, D.C. Mr. Cooper has worked for some of America's most prestigious magazines, including Time, Newsweek, The New Republic, National Journal, and U.S. News and World Report. He now serves as a contributing editor to Washingtonian magazine. For the record, Cooper also earned national attention during the CIA leak case when he was held in contempt of court and threatened with imprisonment for his refusal to name his sources and to testify before the grand jury regarding the Valerie Plame CIA leak investigation, a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court. Matthew has appeared on 60 Minutes, Meet the Press, Hardball, The O'Reilly Factor, and This Week with George Stephanopoulos. He has covered Donald Trump extensively, his hard-hitting and insightful profiles of the Donald always well worth the read. And now, from here until Election Day, Matt will be my co-host on our new segment, Podcast America. I hope you enjoy. Let's talk. So, Matthew Cooper, Sir Matthew.
Yeah. Hey.
Yeah, right. When last we spoke, Kavanaugh's future on the Supreme Court was in question. Today, he sits on the court, pugnacious as ever, if last night's PR swearing in, hear me, PR swearing, was it any, re-swearing in, I should say, correct? Am I correct? It was the second time around.
Right.
Right, that there was any indication of where we're going. Why don't you catch us up on what happened since last we talked, which was before he was voted in, and share your thoughts, and then I'll...
Well, sure. Well, the FBI finished up their investigation Wednesday of last week after we talked and handed over their findings to the Senate. And, Democrats said the findings were wholly inadequate, that they hadn't done a thorough enough search. Republicans said they were satisfied. And, by Saturday morning, all but one Democrat had voted against and all but one Republican had voted for. And Kavanaugh became the next justice of the Supreme Court. And he got sworn in on Saturday, right, just a few hours after being confirmed by the Senate. And last night they had sort of kind of a little party ceremony at the White House, and Trump was quite combative in his remarks, saying that the country owed Kavanaugh an apology, that he'd been found innocent, the latter of which is certainly not the case, and the former of which is in some dispute. So, and today he was there for arguments before the court.
Can I just say that watching last night, and we do tape the night before the show airs, guys, so if you're wondering, want to put this into perspective. But watching this last night, I have to say that he is one creepy guy. I am sorry, but this guy's voice freaks me.
Cav or the president? Well, Justice Kavanaugh? Why?
I just find him creepy. As a woman, I find him... I use the word pugnacious in the intro to this conversation.
there is no warmth in him. There is no humanity in him. He is always looking for the fight. He went for the fight. He thanked all the Republicans. He knew what he was doing. He should have known better. He's trying to get, be on a court where he says, one sentence he said, I'm going to be, an equal opportunity, whatever. And then the next one he's calling for the Republicans. But what made me crazy was how the Supreme Court justices allowed themselves to be used as props in Trump's PR game. That ticked me off. Did they not know he was going to do what he did? Probably not, but they're not stupid. They're politicians too, in a way. They should have known. What was your thought on that?
Well, I did think overall Kavanaugh's remarks were better than Trump's, but I think, as you rightly point out, just thanking the Republicans who helped him was not a particularly unifying message. That said, other parts of Kavanaugh's statement, I'm a justice for everybody, there are no parties on the court, that stuff was, it may have been rote and perhaps even insincere, but I think it was still welcome. I took the liberty of watching Clarence Thomas's White House ceremony after he was confirmed on YouTube, and it was kind of an interesting comparison because it was obviously every bit as contentious as this. But, President George H.W. Bush put up there. He thanked Joe Biden for being there at the ceremony, even though Biden, then the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, had opposed Thomas. He sounded kind of a unifying message. He actually didn't really even address the controversy. He just sort of hailed Thomas's personal story and the fact that the court is a great institution, and Thomas's remarks were fairly similar. There was no end zone dancing, and there was no relitigating Anita Hill. Everybody just kind of moved on, and it's impossible to imagine Dianne Feinstein having gone last night to this thing.
Also, Thomas was very vociferous and smiley. The others weren't last night, which I thought was interesting. So just to whatever.
Right. But they were there.
They were there. Right. Yeah. Absolutely. I don't know if you saw it, but there is footage of the original swearing in, or was it from last night party? Forgive me if I can't remember exactly, because there are so many parties going on around this thing right now. But of him literally pushing his wife aside. If you haven't seen the footage, it's really quite something. And I was talking to a psychologist friend of mine who was firmly convinced, he wouldn't let me use his name on the show, that this guy has got some serious issues and may be an abusive man in his real life, and she may be the victim of some of his abuse if you look at her demeanor and the way that he carries on. But hey, I'm just throwing that out there.
Well, we don't know that.
Yeah, we don't know that, but there are things that keep coming up with this guy, and I guess that's what I said to you. I that voice, that demeanor that he showed during the hearings, I thought was, forgive me, but I thought that was part of his shtick, that he was going to come in angry. And I felt that same energy in his speech the other night. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, no. I think you're right. Look, I mean, this has been a very divisive chapter, and it ended divisively, and I mean, we'll just
okay,
let's see where we go from here.
Let me give you a conspiracy theory, because we could go into how will the Dems come out of this, and how will the Republicans, and how it'll affect the midterms and all of that, and the polls are everywhere right now, folks. So I think that everybody's playing parlor games at this point. Nobody really knows, although the polls seem to be showing it isn't. As the days go on, it's not going to have the effect that Trump says he'd like, or McConnell would like it to have. That being said, I would like to talk about this, and that is, I was going back and trying to figure out what really did happen. And let me just throw this out at you, because I like to make noise, and you're so rational. My theory is this.
Just call me Mr. Spock, yes.
Yeah, my buddy Matt. But let me be conspiratorial. None of this happened for no reason. I mean, the timing of it, everything. Let's not blame who leaked, who didn't leak. I don't care. But I do think that the way that the Dems were playing it hasn't been spoken to correctly. And I think it was a different kind of Machiavellian than the Republicans are saying, or Trump is saying, or the press is saying. And that is, I think their goal was not necessarily to stop him from getting on the court, which would have been 1,000 to 1 shot. Okay. But their goal was on the issue of Roe v. Wade. And that at this point, Kavanaugh is kind of cornered. And that is just not something, if he wants this court to be legitimate, that he's going to be able, after all the noise that was made, to vote against. And of course, I've always said that I never thought Roe v. Wade was totally in jeopardy, because I think that the way they're really going to start messing around with it is on the state level, as they've been doing. But I do think he's kind of hamstrung on this now as a result of what the Dems did to him. What's your thought?
Well, I think there's something to that. Look, I think if you take it from Robert's perspective, I think he's, as the chief, and as all chiefs are, he's worried about the institution of the court and the light in which the court is held, and not wanting it to seem too political. And lots of people surmise that he voted to uphold the Affordable Care Act because he didn't want to seem like the court of the 1930s that struck down all the New Deal legislation and led to the court packing scandal of the late 30s. So I think they probably will go kind of slow on Roe. I never really thought a sweeping overturn was likely, but that said, I think every one of these state laws that keeps getting sent up to them, whether it's to require, hospital-style architecture for an abortion clinic like the last Texas law did, or other things, I think they're going to keep affirming those kind of state rulings. But yeah, I don't think Roe's going away tomorrow.
No, and like I said, I do think that they're watching, the cameras on their backs on this issue. So as a result of what the Dems did, so they were somewhat successful, I think, and we'll see how this goes from here on in. We can talk heroes and heroines in all of this. I don't think so. The only one who comes out of this smelling like a rose, in my opinion, is Lisa McCaskey, because the others had, different reasons or political reasons. Joe Manchin waited until the last minute.
Right.
Heitkamp's polls were already down. The worst that could happen to her is that they went down further. And then there's Susan Collins.
Yeah. Well, I guess my take on the last waivers is that in the end they all did vote. I think they all did vote the way they wanted to in the end. In other words, I think Collins has been aching to vote for Kavanaugh from the beginning, and she got to.
Yeah, I agree.
And I don't think Heitkamp wanted to vote for Kavanaugh, and she didn't. And Murkowski made her unease clear from the beginning. So I think in the end, this, whether you like the outcome or not, I think most of Congress really, it's hard for me to think of a person who really didn't vote with their true beliefs. That said, this is what you get when they vote with their true beliefs.
I think Susan Collins is the woman every Democrat or woman loves to hate, and I think she's toast. And I don't think what she did is going to be forgotten. And it wasn't so much even for the fact that it was the vote itself that made them so angry, so much as how she played it. Just
there's no question she did. She played it
wrong.
Yeah,
wrong. She was dishonest all the way through.
It was certainly not something that was going to endear herself to Democrats, and she will face it. She'll still get a challenge from the right in the primary, and she'll face a very tough general next time.
Yeah, like I said, I think she's toast. The only other thing I want to say, Heitkamp, I just read before we went on air that she actually said that she was going to vote yes, and then she watched Kavanaugh with the sound off. Did you read this story?
I did see that.
Wasn't that amazing?
No, I could totally believe it because, he really did present as very angry at that hearing. And,
Unbelievable. So, okay. So let's get to today's top story, which there's another one. Nikki Haley, one of the few women of color in Trumplandia, resigned not today, 6 days ago.
Yeah.
They kept it a secret. Everybody, the only one apparently knew was Trump baby, right?
Yeah, no, they didn't drop it during Kavanaugh week. No.
Ethics questions about her use of private plane flights.
Sure.
George, and there's that. That's from
possible. That's it.
I don't think that's it. I have a better idea. What do you think? And then I'll tell you.
Well, she could run for Lindsey Graham's seat if Lindsey Graham's not going to be there in 2020. She could be. I've seen all kinds of speculation. I don't really know, but it's got the kind of sudden out of the blueness that makes you not believe the official story.
Well, for sure. And everybody is digging around and digging around and digging around and digging around, and they're getting nothing. And here's my take. I went back. You went back to look at the hearings, Anita Hill hearings. I went back.
You're right.
October 3rd, the same day the New York Times broke the Trump tax story.
Yeah.
It's also the day after Trump trashed Ford at the Mississippi rally.
Oh, and you think she's so upset about Ford?
Look, she's been consistent on one thing. She's a lady. Whether you believe her politics or you don't.
Yeah.
She's been
and she had said, she did say something, right, very respectful about Ford.
I believe.
Prior to that, right.
That was it. And they must have made a deal that she would keep quiet if she wanted to go further as a Republican, whatever. And that's what she did. But you can't tell me that happened that night and her resignation was on his desk the next day. She would have been toast. She would have had no chance, Matt, if she had not. Think ahead for her. If she went along with him on all of this and never really, made a statement, I think, uh-oh.
But do you think in the years to come, as she seeks office, she'll allow her true feelings to emerge, or she'll just always keep this hidden?
Which part? You mean about how she felt about him?
How she felt about Ford and Trump. And
I don't think women will be able to run in the future without this. Whether they're Republican women or Democratic women, will be able to run without this being at front and center in how they deal with it. Absolutely. I think that men probably aren't as sensitive to it on that score as women are going to be. And if we see women realign with the Democratic Party, today I was even reading some evangelical white women are starting to go with the Democratic Party. That it's, where does that put a Nikki Haley if she decides to run as a Republican and she wants women's votes? This is a big issue for her if she runs. So, yeah, I do think that was the killer for her. I'll play with you all the way up to this line, but you just crossed it for me because that gets in the way of my being able to run in the future. So that's what I think. But we'll see what happens. All right. So I just all right. So we had some fun. He called it a glamour. And by the way, she was very, terrific about it and diplomatic about it. He tried. One little piece that he got through there, and I don't think it was a small piece if you understand Trump, and when he said, well, the UN is a glamorous position. And do you remember him saying that during the thing today?
Yeah, right.
And then they threw out Ivanka, which was, of course, never going to happen, and yada, yada, yada. And he didn't say it for that. I think that was his hit was her. It's not a brain thing. He can't help himself. It was a dig to her. That's what.
That she's not glamorous.
No. It's just a glamour job. It's a know-nothing job anyway.
Okay, so he was making it sound like it's just a silly job.
Yeah, it was our sarcastic New York kind of thing that only New Yorkers do that everybody else would look at and say, what the hell is that? So yeah. All right. So, okay. We've done that one. I think we've done that one. We'll have to wait to see how that one plays out.
We'll see.
All right. I want to bring up Bill and Hillary for a minute. For two reasons. One is they've announced a tour, Mr. and Mrs. Tour. I think that's hilarious.
Right.
And they're going to wait till they're going to wait till after the midterm to do it. However, she's starting to pop up here, there, and whatever. And she just did an interview with Christiane Amanpour that's running, I think, tonight. Immediately on my Twitter feed, my Republicans are, going, oh, why doesn't she shut the hell up? And my Democratic friends are saying, why doesn't she shut the hell up? We kind of touched on this last week a little bit, I think, but I did want to bring it up only for the fact that they're clearly not willing to go gently into the good night, those two. Yeah?
No, not at all. But, neither did Al Gore after losing the election and winning the popular vote. I think they feel like they still have things to contribute. I think there's still lots of Democrats who want them to raise money for them. There are a lot of people who buy their books. There are obviously some Democrats who'd like them to just be off stage, but I don't think that's far from a universal feeling. I don't know. You think they should be quiet?
I who am never on the fence about much.
Yeah.
Right? I'm somewhat on the fence on this. I think that she could be used strategically, in certain, districts. That's for sure. He
I'm sure Claire McCaskill does not want them
exactly.
visiting.
Well, she never.
Frankly, they don't want to visit her.
Well, yeah,
so,
exactly. I mean, she is I always go back to her and say the reason that Hillary never became president was Claire McCaskill. By the way,
yeah.
No matter what she did last time around, but she screwed him the first time. She and Bill Richardson.
Yeah.
But Trump said something interesting about her today because somebody mentioned what she was saying, and he said, "Well, she was making hay out of what happened last night with Kavanaugh and the PR thing." And he said she didn't get it then, and she doesn't get it now. Meaning, I think he was saying that PR is the name of the game in this, and she played it straight and narrow. That's the reason I think she's important in that, Matt, is because somebody please bring us back to reality and into. There is right, there is wrong, and there are some places where it's not about the win, it's about what's right. And can she maybe come out of all of this being the voice of reason at the end of the day to bring us back to reality? Maybe that's what the two of them are going to try and do when they go out on tour. That's my thought. You got any thought on that, or is that enough?
Well, yeah, no, I mean, I just, I think generally the rule that sort of former presidents don't criticize their successors too vociferously, and certainly not too soon after leaving office, is generally a good.
Right.
Yeah, but Cheney went nuts on Obama from the first day, and Obama's been pretty outspoken about Trump. I don't know. I just don't begrudge anyone writing and talking and selling books. I mean, it's up to them, and I sort of don't think it has. I don't think it has a big impact on the electorate. And,
I think it would have a big impact on ginning up the Republican because she's still the woman that they love to hate. But
that's fair.
But I think in return now, I think the Democratic women have somebody they love to hate, and they could play that game too, if they want to, lock one up, lock the other up. It's crazy. Right. All right, let me change the subject again. And I just want to say two words. Bob Mueller. Remember him?
Yes. He's out there. He's working.
Have you heard anything? Anything bubbling around?
Any secrets? No. No secrets at the temple. No. I think he's just doing his business.
It's odd how quiet it got. And he let go of a lot of his prosecutors. Is he sitting home now and he's wrapping it all up. I'm of that they all owe the Democratic Party 13 days before to screw Trump before the midterms.
Right.
That's
exactly.
Even the score.
The Comey Day.
Yeah, right. I'm looking for that. We may not see that, but I'm looking for that.
Right.
Yeah. That's not. I don't know. All right. I want to talk on tactics. And I want to discuss Trump on mob rule. And I want to discuss it in this respect because I think it's something the Democratic Party just misses at. They really don't get how to play mean and effective the way that Trump does. And here's what I was going to... Marco Rubio, of all people, posted today on Twitter about mob rule. And I posted back. I'm going to read you what I posted and tell you that it went viral on Twitter. You're a 1950s man who doesn't believe women are capable of making their own decisions. We protest because we believe we are right. And as you and Trump do, we'll do what it takes to make our voices heard. Some advice to you and Trump. Start listening so we don't have to shout.
Okay, tough words.
I was shocked by how many women answered in and agreed on that line. It's kind of because really what it's about is Trump, again, creating the lie, and he's got the whole team doing it. He's got McConnell repeating it, and he's got, Lil Lindsay repeating it, and he's got, they just do that so damn well. Why can't Democrats pull this? Do they have a leader? Maybe that's what I'm getting to. Does the Democratic Party have a leader? Do they have a PR firm? What is wrong with them? Okay, talk to me.
Well, which are you talking about the organized protests that?
Well, that's what they're talking. Trump is saying that they were all mob rule and they
right,
kind of thing. There wasn't any of that. But
are you saying you thought the organized protests were effective? You're not commenting on the organized.
No.
protests.
I think they were incredibly effective. Obviously,
right?
That's not the issue. But they're coming back because they were so effective to not say, which a normal president would say, we hear you. And we're working with you on this. He turned it into those stupid Democrats are paid, off by, whomever, to do what they need to do, and it was mob rule, and they were killing people, and they had guns, and they're ginning this up because their people only read what they read on Twitter. They don't,
Right.
Okay. So, but my point being, Democrats are not that effective in return.
Yeah, in terms of their replies, right.
Or in terms of being the ones who start this is how we're going to we're going to handle it.
Well, I think this is going to be a big issue going to presidential is have the Democratic leaders been too passive? Are they too soft? Or are they not, pointed enough? I think, there is a feeling among a lot of Democrats that, someone like McConnell will do anything.
You think?
And someone like Schumer won't do anything. And so, I think that's going to be, I think you're onto something.
And then you get into the Avenatti thing where they made him the fall guy in a way. And in fact, I don't think that was utterly fair. I'm against that, putting him down. We talked a little bit about that last week. But I guess...
Well, I certainly don't think, just because Collins blamed him, I don't think it means that he really had an effect on the vote.
Well, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. She certainly wasn't effective, his person, and but it wasn't Collins. I mean, it was the Democrats. It was Feinstein and everybody.
There's no question. Right. The Democrats were like, you're messing this up.
Right. And the point being, he's a street fighter, and the Democrats really need to pull somebody like him in and have a conversation with them. Because even though it's not the way that we like it, they go low, we go high, that obviously really wasn't totally effective. And here we are again.
Yeah, well, President Avenatti.
Well, I don't want to go that far. I'm not sure.
Well, Bannon were on the other night. I don't think Bannon was being totally disenchanted.
No, he wasn't. I'm sure he wasn't.
Would be a good candidate. But Avenatti thinks he'd be a good candidate, so,
It's just, it's utterly bizarre to me. Okay. So we get to this, and this is like where I want to end it this week, and that is, one thing is very clear. The Republican Party is not in sync with most Americans. Most Americans do not want Roe v. Wade turned over. Most women are not happy with what's going on with the Republican Party. Most Americans do not want Obamacare overturned. And by the way, they're pulling a fast one. I just read before we went on air, which is during the week where you can sign up for Obamacare. They're going to use that week to do some fixing on the website. It will not be available. I mean, these guys are up to no good. They want to build the wall. Most Americans do not want the wall, money spent on the wall. And here we are. And these boys are in charge. Okay, you want to explain this to me and say, whenever has there been a time when it's been like this, where they've owned three branches of government, but the country is not in sync with them?
Well, you got a good point there. They're just they are fighting against popular opinion on a bunch of things. But they're helped by having a gerrymandered Congress, so that helps a lot. They're helped by having a U.S. Senate that's skewed to rural areas. They're helped by having a decent enough economy going along, and let's see what they actually get of this stuff, right? I mean, the healthcare Act, was not overturned. They're going to keep trying to screw it up, but it wasn't overturned, and as we were saying earlier, they're probably not going to get Roe overturned, at least anytime soon. So, let's see how much of the unpopular stuff they actually get.
Okay, looking ahead for the week ahead, what are you looking at? Anything? Anything got your...
Oh, I just want to see how, some of these races start to unfold now that we're kind of getting towards the home stretch here. Some of these Republicans going to start to bounce back a little in Arizona and Nevada. I'm curious, what are you feeling about Florida? Is DeSantis really dead in the water, or is...
Oh my God!
Do you have time for a comeback?
Well, I don't think he has time for a comeback. I think where he utterly got killed is the other day when they came out with the proof that he had written a book about slavery is a good thing. I think that kind of was the end of it for him, honestly.
Yeah, generally that's.
I mean, that was like, how did they not vet him and know that book existed? I don't get it. But I do think right now Scott's ahead by 1 point over Nelson, which is a statistical tie. That's like ridiculous. And,
right.
Gillum is obviously ahead, and they've all, of course, now the hurricane is coming. Everybody is like, wait, yesterday Scott said he was suspending campaigning because the hurricane was coming, and then he was with Trump the whole day, which is the first time he's been with Trump or even mentioned Trump's name, but that was on the heels of Kavanaugh.
Right.
And so it really didn't, I'm sure he will withdraw from that. Nelson is, from what I understand, still's got some money in the pot that he's going to throw out at the very last minute and these things usually do break with the incumbent. But I don't know. I think Gillum's got it. But I don't know what's going and maybe if Gillum's got it, by the way, that then Nelson rides in on his coattails, which is kind of bizarre.
Yeah, well, that's a big deal. That's a big deal.
That is, but it's very fractious down here, as it always is, and
I'm sure the TV ads must be crazy.
And that's the other thing. I mean, I wish that I could go, was in charge of Nelson's campaign. He's got really bad ads, and I got to tell you, Scott's ads are starting to be blistering.
Oh boy.
Yeah, so somebody needs to help him on that. But I will tell you, I saw today on CNN, as we say goodbye after this lovely half hour, that I saw on CNN today that they were smart. They did the good thing, which is Scott was coming on to talk about the hurricane, but they closed it.
Oh, yes. You always get judged by your hurricane. Yeah, no, but you get judged by your hurricane.
Yeah. So, but they did bring Nelson on. Right away. They didn't.
That's good.
They gave him equal airtime.
They all have their disaster fleece or whatever.
Well, I think, and that's a great position for Nelson, who I'm obviously in favor of because this guy's
he's not Scott.
Well, he's seen the storms from space.
Yeah, that's always a good. Yeah,
and so he became quite poetic. See if you can find that.
Right.
Okay,
that's good.
So that's where we are. A lot has changed. Nothing has changed.
All right.
And
next week, even more.
And next week, it's going to start to get hot. As I
said, will.
Yes. So it's always lovely, darling.
Always great, dear. Talk to you soon.
Say good night, Hallie.
Good night, Hallie.
Good night, Mr. Matthew. All right.
I've been speaking with journalist Matthew Cooper. You can read his insightful reporting at Washingtonian magazine and follow him on Twitter at @MattIsCoop and on Facebook at Matthew Cooper. We're listening to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. My guest today is veteran White House correspondent and contributing editor to Washingtonian magazine, Matthew Cooper, my co-host on Podcast America, and the author of a brand new, fascinating book, The DISRUPTORS, 50 People Who Changed the World, Alan Axelrod. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show posts new podcasts Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern at hallicasser-jayne.com, and it's available wherever you listen to your podcasts. Be sure to find me on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, on all your favorite apps. You can find the Halli Casser-Jayne Show on your Alexa device, too. Oh, and come play with me on Twitter at the Halli CJ Show. Until recently, disruption was a very bad word, plain and simple. That is how Alan Axelrod begins his new book, The Disruptors, 50 People Who Changed the World. Nevertheless, Axelrod has titled his book The Disruptors, and he defines disruptors as those who upend cultural, technical, spiritual, and scientific paradigms, and thus alter the way we live forever. What does Charles Darwin have in common with Steve Jobs, or with Jackson Pollock, Martin Luther, Betty Friedan, Johannes Gutenberg, and DJ Kool Herc? They were all disruptors. From the invention of the printing press to the fight for women's equality, from the smartphone to the invention of hip-hop, each visionary in Alan's book upended our world as we knew it, changing our lives forever, some might say for the better, some for the worse. For those who don't know Alan Axelrod, Alan is the author of more than 100 books. He's the co-author of the New York Times bestseller, What Every American Should Know About American History, as well as the Business Week bestsellers, Patent on Leadership, and Elizabeth First, CEO. He has appeared on numerous TV and radio programs, and in magazines and newspaper articles. Let's talk with Alan Axelrod. Hi, Alan. How are you?
Yep.
You there?
Good. Yourself?
I'm pretty
Yeah,
good.
I'm here.
All right. A little confusing there. I'm getting a lot of voices coming into my ear, please. But here you are. Nice to have you here. All right. Let's talk. Let's talk disruption. I'm a disruptor, so I love that word and everything that goes along with it. So talk to me about how you used it in terms of this book, The Disruptors, 50 People Who Changed the World. It's a new definition in a way. Talk to me.
It is a new definition. For most of, up through the 20th century, certainly, the word disruption, in the words of the 1928 edition of the Oxford English Dictionary, meant the action of rending or bursting asunder, violent dissolution of continuity, forcible severance. It was all pretty violent, pretty bad. And then in 1997, Harvard business philosopher, I would call him, Clayton Christensen, coined the word disruptive innovation. And he used this to describe anything new that creates new markets and new relationships between businesses, but at the same time displaces old markets and also displaces established old firms and the products associated with them. So disruptive innovation is creative destruction, or you could put it another way, it's destructive creation. And traditional historians will talk about perhaps the builders of civilization, but actually the most innovative builders were also destroyers. They tore down something in order to build what they wanted to build, and that is what disruptors are.
Interesting, very interesting. Now, you begin with you've categorized your choices. So tell us how you chose what categories or which categories you cover in the book, because you don't cover them all, which I'll talk about in a minute, but just how you broke it down for your, research.
Well, it seemed to me that the arrangement here, talk about philosophy and religion, art and culture, science, technology, enterprise, education, society, and popular culture, covered a broad array of areas in which people can be disruptively innovative. Now, the thing is that if you are a truly disruptive innovator, you tend to cross over a lot of these distinctions. But it does at least simply give the presentation of these historical figures something more than just a random chronology, and lets you compare and contrast within these categories the different figures.
Here's what was interesting to me, that there was no category for politicians, who I think are the most disruptive class in the history of the Republic. Talk to me about why you didn't separate them out.
And I'll tell you, that was a very self-conscious decision for purposes of this book, because in our age in particular, politics has gone almost beyond the ability to argue about it rationally, historically and intellectually. So my thought was that if I put a category of politics, it would sort of lead us all down a kind of rabbit hole and of argument for the sake of argument, and that's all that anybody would pay attention to. So it was a sacrifice, and you're absolutely right that that politics is inherently or can be inherently disruptive, but I consciously chose to avoid it in this particular book because of the environment that we're in. It might be a subject for a book in itself where all you're talking about is political disruption.
But here's another interesting reason why I'm not sure that it really would serve your purpose in this book is because you said it in the beginning, really, disruptive or destructive. And they're two different things entirely.
Yes.
And so I'll give you that. So why did you choose the people, and how did you choose who you would name? And because boy, I'll tell you, that for me that would have been a nightmare. That would have been years.
It is hard.
Yeah.
When you're writing for a commercial press, you don't have years and years. So that's that artificial deadline kind of accelerates your attention a little bit. And the number 50, I will admit, is somewhat arbitrary. It's enough to give you some space to really discuss these figures without writing a book that is 1,000 pages long. But certainly there's a lot of subjectivity to it. But I can tell you that the criteria that I applied to the candidates for inclusion in the book was that each of these figures had to have had an innovative and disruptive effect on civilization. They had to introduce into the world something very new, and at the same time something that sort of elbowed other things out of the way. So I looked for historical figures who had done both aspects of innovation, the creative part and the destructive part.
So you must have had a blast doing this. What fun to be able to delve into so many interesting people's lives. But if I was to take each disruptor out of their category, Alan, and just name them, for instance, a Martin Luther or a Frank Lloyd Wright or an Isaac Newton, Henry Ford, Madonna, is there a trait that you discovered that each of these disruptors have in common? Were you surprised by something, and maybe that's a personality trait that goes across the board for the kind of people who go ahead and do this kind of thing?
Well, this will sound obvious. They're disruptive. That is their trait. They are willing to disrupt the status quo. They are willing to challenge and to question. You can look at any of these individuals, and what they have is boundless curiosity that leads them to question things as they are. Moreover, they have at some level, all of them, a belief that they can make changes for the better, for the truer, for the more accurate, for the necessary. So the one overriding trait that unites these people is, I would say, I guess, I want to put it another way, dissatisfaction with the way things are and a desire to make them different or better or truer.
So I got and that I get, but it was worth letting you say that because I think that's an interesting thing to talk about. But I also would take it one step further. Was there something in their life experience that was the same across the board that made them the kind of people who had the courage, the nerve, or whatever to go ahead and disrupt when the world wasn't quite ready for maybe what they had to deliver?
For some of these figures, we don't know because we don't really know much about their lives. Confucius, Sun Tzu. In fact, with somebody like Sun Tzu, it's not even certain that he was one person.
Right.
Might have been a conglomerate of several. But most of these figures that we do know something about, what we can see in their personal stories is that they were more or less outsiders. In the case of, for example, Dorothea Dix, the reformer who who reformed penitentiaries, insane asylums, and then the medical care for Civil War soldiers, had a horrible childhood. She had an abusive father, and he was an alcoholic, and it looks pretty apparent that her mother was too. While her mother wasn't abusive, she was sort of, feckless. She couldn't stop her husband from his brutality. And Dorothea basically ran away from home and went to live with her grandparents. You look at Frank Lloyd Wright. He was somebody who saw himself as different from everyone else and not bound by ordinary morality. Jackson Pollock came from a broken home. He had a father who was never home. He was raised in a certain amount of poverty. He also had a sort of a permissiveness that he thrived in, but he was an outsider. He was not in the mainstream of things. Freud was a Jew living in a place and at a time of deep anti-Semitism. So he, too, was an outsider. His family was reasonably prosperous, and he was given a good education, but he was never really accepted into the mainstream of society. So you can go on and on like this. These people all tend to have people where we actually know something about their lives, they tend to have a self-identification as outsiders, as people on the periphery. And the fact is that even in organizations, most innovation takes place on the periphery. Steve Jobs, who was also a foundling, he was an orphan, essentially. He was adopted and was therefore an outsider from the beginning. But Steve Jobs led the group that created the Mac by taking them out of the mainstream of the Apple company and literally moving them across the street to a building in a strip mall over which he hoisted a Jolly Roger, a pirate flag. And that became the Mac Group. And they were encouraged to, as he would say, think different. And he literally put them on the periphery of his company, physically, geographically. So this is a common factor in all of these folks.
Fascinating, isn't it? Are the great spiritual leaders of yesterday equal to the great spiritual leaders of our day? Are people, do you know what I'm saying in that question?
I do.
Yeah, talk to me about that, because I'm curious what your thoughts are.
It depends what you mean by spiritual leaders. If you're talking about strictly religious leaders, I'm not aware of any particular religious leader who has a widespread, positive, and profound effect on the world. I could be wrong, but you don't have to reach back too far to see spiritual leaders who are incredible, such as Gandhi, such as, I would say probably Pope John Paul II. You can look at, I'm now grasping, so I'm wondering if my answer would be sort of a qualified no, I don't see it.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting. And I would ask you the same thing about, as you went along and you were picking the people that you picked and then looking at their lives. But a Leonardo da Vinci versus a Frank Lloyd Wright, both are art and what have you. And then are we, as we go along the path of the world and time, as time goes on, are we as brilliant as maybe we once were?
Well, a lot of it has to do with having an appreciative public. But it sounds stupid to me. It sounds stupid for me to say that Jackson Pollock is as great as Leonardo da Vinci. It's a kind of comparison I wouldn't want to make. But I would say that as artists, da Vinci did a lot of other things as well. Right. But as artists, I would see a Jackson Pollock as being on a plane that is quite comparable to Da Vinci. Pollock took art to a very new place in which art truly became representative only of itself, or it became representative of the act of actually creating. Those action paintings record the motions of the activity that went into creating them. They record the breath of the person who created them. They record the vision and the feelings and the physical sensations that person had, and made art a much more two-dimensional visual art a much more direct representation of some moments lived than virtually anything that went before it. So I would say that recent history has certainly given us very great artists, has certainly given us very great social and spiritual leaders of the Gandhi type, Martin Luther King certainly, social activists in the end of the 20th century and the late 19th century, such as Jacob Riis. I don't think that our civilization is in decline, if that's your underlying question.
Well, partly that was, but the other part would be that I would say to you that is time relevant in how we consider disruptors, or
absolutely,
or heretics, or too pop culture or off the wall. Do they get their due in their lifetimes, or does some time need to pass before they can really be awarded their due recognition and hold on to it?
Right.
By the way,
right, and the answer to that is some of them do, some of them don't. And that sounds like an equivocal answer, because it is an equivocal answer, but it also happens to be true. But you look at we have a sort of myth that geniuses are always misunderstood. But take somebody like Beethoven, who's not in this book, but who I would certainly consider a disruptor. Beethoven had many things going against him. I mean, not least of which was he was deaf, or was becoming progressively deaf. He was really cut off from the mainstream of music. And he often created music that was very difficult to play at the time. It went sort of beyond the limits of performers. But all of that, and it was very unlike what came before. But all of that said, he was a very financially successful composer. He was very widely appreciated and well recognized. And he died not a fabulously wealthy man, but somebody who was quite well off. So his genius was appreciated in his own time. And in fact, at his funeral in Vienna, there is a story about a traveler coming through and watching this funeral procession, which many people had gathered to watch. And he asked a man on the street, "What is this? What has happened?" And the man replied, "The general of musicians has died." And this was the popular perception of the man. So many innovative geniuses are, in fact, appreciated, as was Steve Jobs, for example, as was actually Jackson Pollock. He had terrible personal problems. But Life magazine, shortly before he died, did a big article on him that was titled, "Is this the greatest artist in America?" And their answer was yes. So there you have it.
Yeah. Are all innovations, or how many are the result of mistakes, happenstance, being in the right place at the right time?
A lot of them are a lot of them are the convergence of happenstance and mistakes. The invention of Bakelite, what became Bakelite, Otto Baekeland, who was a Belgian chemist who came to America. Baekeland was working with various resins, trying to make various products with these resins. And he had a problem. He found that these materials clogged up his chemical apparatus. So he decided to create a solvent that would dissolve them. And he came up with something, and it dissolved everything except one kind of substance. And instead of just saying, I failed. He said, wait a minute, this other stuff that I created is really strong. I can mold it. When it's hot, I can mold it into anything I want. But once it is cooled off, it becomes a very strong material. And that accident resulted in Bakelite, which was the foundation of all modern plastics. Now, in effect, it is an accident, but it was an accident that was under the supervision of somebody who knew what to recognize when he saw it. Louis Pasteur said that that chance favors the prepared mind. So Louis Pasteur understood that when you were doing experiments, there would be random things that would happen. There would be unexpected results. And you could reject them, you could ignore them, you could misunderstand them, but if you had the right education, if you had the right level of curiosity and preparedness, you would be able to exploit them. So it's the accidents, it's not like a lottery ticket, that you just happen to get. The accidents require the convergence of the accident and somebody to recognize it. There was a case, a famous case with Thomas Edison, great inventor, most prolific inventor through most of the 20th century even. Over 1,000 patents to his name. One of his patents was for a thing called the Edison effect, and he had been experimenting with variations of the incandescent electric lamp. And he put in one of these a metal plate and on the other side of the bulb a filament. And he discovered that through the vacuum, a glow was created. It wasn't created on the wire. It was created in the space between this plate and the other element, between the anode and the cathode. And he decided, well, maybe this will be useful someday, but he couldn't think of how. It wasn't bright enough to be a source of illumination, but he patented it. The Edison effect became, in other hands, the foundation of the vacuum tube, which was the beginning of electronics, and eventually led to the transistor, which eventually led to the microchip. Right. But Edison didn't know this. Edison didn't understand it at the time. And it was an accident.
But we only have a few more minutes. I was going to ask this as a question, but I make the statement. Maybe you want to answer back, and that is the statement would be: I wonder how the spiritual comes into all of this. Does a higher power, a God, a Muhammad, a Buddha, whatever, come into how people's lives go and the ideas that come into their head? And I don't think that that's something to just say, voodoo, kind of thing. It does amaze me how the universe works and how ideas out of nowhere evaporate, come into our, right. our concepts and our reality. Last question: the disruptors, 50 people who changed the world. I got to ask you this, Alan. You did all this research. It's a phenomenal piece of work. It's good reading. Did you come away from the writing of this book thinking change is always a good thing, or that change is sometimes just too gosh darn disruptive?
Well, change for its own sake is not inherently good or bad, and I think of our political situation, which is one reason I avoided politics, but I think of it today, and I think of what the former Speaker of the House in the 1940s and 1950s, Sam Rayburn, said, which is, any jackass can kick down a barn, but it takes a carpenter to build one. And you simply destroying the status quo accomplishes nothing. You have to have this creative destruction. You have to have a creative impulse to justify the destructive disruption that precedes it. And if you just tear down institutions and you just make change for the sake of making change, you've made no progress. Quite the contrary.
Thanks, Alan. Enjoyed having you here.
Pleasure. Thank you.
I've been speaking with Alan Axelrod, the author of The Disruptors, 50 People Who Changed the World. For more information on the book, visit Amazon.com. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show is a production of Resec, LLC. Be sure to tune in to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show at hallicasserjayne.com or listen on your favorite app. New podcasts are posted Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern.